And welcome to Dear Jane. I am Scott Baker. She is Marcy Little. Marcy, how are you?
Great. So excited for today.
Oh man, today's guest is fantastic. There's probably we could probably do a minimum 6 or 7 episodes with Kelly Lester from And Then There Were None. She's actually with a lot of different groups. She's involved in a lot of different things. But her background contains so many fascinating angles that it's going to be fun to sort of cover a lot of ground in a short period of time.
Yeah, there were so many questions I wanted to ask her that we just ran out of time for, but you guys are in for a treat. You're going to hear a lot of fascinating information, a lot of insight into what the pro-life movement and various aspects of the movement can be doing a better job at in reaching abortion-minded women.
I mean, she has been involved in drugs. She's had 4 abortions herself. I learned just recently she ran drugs for the Puerto Rican mafia. I mean, you can make a movie about
Yeah,
her life. It's
they
it's
they
fascinating. But
probably should.
we'll get. Yeah, that's probably right. But before we get to that, before we get to the great conversation with Kelly, let's talk about our sponsor, Choose Life Marketing.
If you are part of a pro-life organization and you are either trying to reach abortion-minded women, let's say you're a pregnancy center, or maybe you're trying to reach pro-life donors with what your organization does, you really need to reach out to Choose Life Marketing. They're a full-service marketing agency. And on top of that, if you think, there's no way I can afford marketing, I can barely afford to do anything, Choose Life can help you with that too. They have a phenomenal fundraising team that has helped pregnancy centers and other pro-life nonprofits raise millions of dollars to fuel their pro-life ministry. So you really need to check them out, whatever your marketing needs are. If you need help placing better ads, reaching the right target audience, they just can do it all. They have a team of over 70 pro-life strategists and specialists who are just passionate about the cause and would love to partner with you. So check them out, chooselifemarketing.com, to help advance your pro-life mission.
All right, let's get to it. Kelly Lester, our guest today on Dear Jane from And Then There Were None. Kelly Lester joins us here today on Dear Jane. Kelly, a lot of people in the pro-life movement are familiar with your story. It's so compelling. You've really have exposure to lots and lots of different things. Into drugs. You've had abortions. You've been an abortion worker. All of these things. We're going to get into all of that today. As you consider your history, was there a final straw for you that sort of this is what ignited serious life change for me? Can you point to one thing?
Oh yeah, for sure. There was a moment where I was in the middle of a domestic violence fight, and my boyfriend pushed me on the ground. We had ripped the door off the door frame, and there was a piece of the frame laying on the ground. And he pushes me on the ground, and he's over top of me with that board in hand, and goes to hit me over the head with it. Drops the board, punches me in the face multiple times. My face explodes, blood goes everywhere. The fight stops. And now that was not the first time something like that had happened. But what was the pivotal moment was 2 days later, I come home to Virginia. My father meets me and sees me, and my face is swollen. My eyes are swollen shut. My nose is crooked. My mouth is all busted up. And when my father saw me, he starts to cry. And I said, "Oh, Dad, I was in a car accident." And then he looks at me and he says, "Kelly, 2 nights ago, I was asleep. And the middle of the night, I was awoken and I had a vision of you laying on the floor with your head split wide open. And so I began to pray." And so I realized in that moment that the moment when my boyfriend had dropped the board was the moment when my father, 2,000 miles away, had been praying for me. Mm-hmm. And that was a eye-opening moment of recognizing that God had spared my life, and later on, I was talking with God, and he showed me that he had saved my life many times up to that point. I mean, I can tell you a story. I was in Arizona driving a Jeep Wrangler, and a car hit my Jeep, and I physically went out of the Jeep and felt something grab me. I did not have a seatbelt on, and bring me back into the Jeep. Now explain that. Walked away without a single scratch. There were different times in my life where my life had been spared and there was no rhyme or reason for it or explanation for it other than the Lord. But that moment, I could very clearly see my dad prayed. God gave him a vision. My dad prayed and he saved my life. And so that was something I couldn't deny, God's hand in my life and his protection in my life. And so that definitely opened my eyes and made me shift.
So obviously, you don't end up in a place like that just on a whim or by accident. Can you,
Sure.
for people who don't know your story and are not familiar with your story, can you fill in some of those background details a little bit to kind of describe how you got to that point, to fill out that picture for people?
Yeah, it started at a very young age. It started at 3 or 4 years old. I was molested by a family member, not a close family member, but a distant family member. And that caused me to do things as a 3 or 4 year old child that I shouldn't do, know things that I shouldn't know. My mom walked in and saw me doing those things. I felt shame because of that, but didn't even really know why. And that caused me to be a very insecure, very shy young girl. And at the bus stop, I was teased and I was picked on. I became very super introverted. And then in high school, I snuck out and went to a party with some girls. It wasn't something I usually did, but was trying to fit in and trying to belong. And at that party, one of the popular boys raped me. And so again, felt shame, felt like I'd done something wrong, told my friends, they didn't believe me, told my youth pastor, and she said, well, if you never snuck out and gone to that party, that would have never happened. And so I felt like it was my fault. And that caused me to act out in, more ways. I became very promiscuous. At 15, I had my first abortion, walked in a nationally ranked tennis player, a straight A student, and a regular church attender, and walked out and ran from everything good in my life. Because although there had been traumatic things that had happened to me up to that point, this was the one thing that I decided. I decided that I was going to do this. I didn't understand the ins and outs of abortion, but I very much knew that I was pregnant and I didn't want to be. And I thought that God would never be able to forgive me for killing my child. And so for that reason, I just ran hard in the other direction. And as you said, Scott, I mean, you name it, I've done it. Pornography, homosexuality, eating disorders, domestic violence. I ran drugs for the Puerto Rican mafia, got involved in everything and anything, trying to cover that void, that feeling of shame. And ended up working even in the abortion facility where at this point, I'd had 2 abortions, and went there. And my first one was super traumatic. My second one was even more traumatic because it was a chemical abortion. I didn't have the father of that child wanted to keep that child, and I didn't. And I didn't have the finances to be able to pay for another surgical abortion. So I went with chemical because it was cheaper, quite honestly. And it was told to me that it would be quick and easy and painless. And I did. And it was not quick or easy or painless. It was for 48 hours. I thought I was going to die. And then when I find myself walking in to apply at the abortion facility, people ask, why would you do that? You had 2 terrible experiences. Why would you go work there? But I assumed that my experience had to be isolated, that I had to be the only one who had had that kind of an experience, because if it was the norm, everybody would hear about it. We would know how terrible it was. And quite honestly, I thought I deserved that experience because I knew that I was killing my child. And I thought, this is my punishment from God, basically is what I thought. And then left the abortion industry and continued in, because I was still very caught up in sin and still now not only dealing with the shame of what I'd done to myself, but now how I had been complicit in, over 2,000 abortions with other women. And that feeling of shame continued in the drugs, continued in all of the things. And then that culminated with the moment that we spoke about earlier. So yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
Wow. Several fascinating roads we can go down.
sure.
Let's start with this one.
Okay.
Let's start with you mentioned 4 abortions.
Mm-hmm.
What do we as a movement, as the pro-life movement, not yet understand about experiencing abortion? Going through that, the process afterwards, anything about it that we still don't quite get?
I'll be honest with you. I think there's most of it we still don't get. I think that um, there are so many facets to it, and there are so many levels to it that are really hard to understand unless you've been there. And quite honestly, you shouldn't understand it because it's such a thing. It would be hard for you to possibly understand. I think understanding that when fear is such a powerful emotion, fear will cause you to do things that you would have never done before. I like to talk about the COVID epidemic that we had. Yes, there were many people that died, and I know several of them. There were a lot of things about that are understandable why there was so much fear. But there was a lot of reaction to that was completely out of hand. Churches closing down, schools closing down, hospital, all of those things. Remember those moments that we all experienced of extreme fear. The world is over. We're all going to die. We all went through that on some level in that process. That is basically what you're feeling like in these moments. My whole life is over. Everything, my hopes and my dreams are going to die. And there is no one there to help me. There's nothing out there. Maybe my reputation is going to die. Maybe my relationship with my parents is going to die. Maybe my career, all of those things that's in that moment. And you don't know where to go and don't know what to do. And then there's an organization say, just come to us. Just come to us. We will help you. We will take care of everything. We'll even pay for it now. And when you leave, you're part of our club. You're part of the good guys fighting against those judgmental, critical, condescending people. You'll be part of our team. And so in that moment of crisis, yes, life is beautiful, but finding out you're pregnant is terrifying. Even if you've been trying to have a child. I remember the first time my husband and I found out we were pregnant. There's this moment of, oh no, what has happened? Okay, we're excited about this, but you know what I mean? Like, it is a very real thing to freak out a little bit, but you don't have the support, all of those other things that I spoke about. And so these women are absolutely at their wits' end and don't know what to do and are seeing the end to so many things. Financial stability, you could go on and on and on. And then also understanding that the abortion industry is a well-crafted. It is not happenstance, the things that they say. It is not by accident the way that they market things. Every single part of the abortion industry is scripted, is tested, and is planned, and is on purpose, done with purpose, on purpose. And we were told when a woman called our center to assume that abortion was the best thing for her because she was so desperate. She was looking for any kind of help. And so we needed to assume that it was the best thing for her and take out every obstacle to her making that choice. And that's what the abortion industry does. That's what they've done, and they've done it better and better and more and more. And we need to see that. We also need to understand in the pro-life movement that as much as we believe, and it does, that abortion hurts women, the abortion industry believes that abortion helps women. They absolutely believe that. They absolutely believe that they are helping women. I did. That's why I thought I wanted to help people. Now, I got in it and saw the realities of it and went, oh my gosh, we're not actually helping people. But I got into it wanting to help people and thinking that that's what I was doing. So when you were talking to people on the pro-abortion side, they as vehemently believe that they are helping women as we believe that they're hurting women. And so all of those things make this perfect storm of what we see now. And the pro-life side is so segmented, and we are so at odds with each other, and we're so afraid that somebody's going to steal our donors or steal our something, and we are not in unity. Unity commands the blessing. That's what the Bible says. The pro-abortion side is in unity. And so we're seeing that. We're seeing them in government and everything. And so that's, those are some of the major ways. There's so many, but those are some of the major things I would say.
I was thinking as you were sharing, even before you started talking about all the factions and the disunity in the pro-life side, it just always feels like the other side is so coordinated and they work together with all the different parts. Obviously Planned Parenthood is a huge organization and all their affiliates have to be in line. But even outside of that, in the public policy space, all of the different pro-abortion organizations work under the same mission, and they've been very successful doing that. So we could spend all day, I think, talking about how the pro-life movement can be more unified, and I would love to get that. I wanted to ask you one thing. What can we on the pro-life side, whether it's pregnancy centers or different organizations, what message do we need to be saying to women to counteract the messages that they're hearing from the pro-abortion side in that moment when they're so overcome by fear? What do they need to hear from us?
Yeah, I think you hit on it a little bit when we were talking about the different organizations. Even the thing about the pro-abortion side is they have one focus: abortion. That's it. That's all they have to focus. All their attention in is abortion. On the pro-life side, we have to focus on maternal health, and we have to focus on care while she's pregnant, and we have to focus on care after she's pregnant, and we have, you know what I mean? It's all
Mm-hmm.
of these housing and transportation and childcare and diapers and all the dad and the grandparents and all of these aspects that make it difficult. It's a lot easier if all we had to focus on was birth, but that's not what being pro-life is. We know that, right? And so that's one of the reasons, in all fairness, for the pro-life movement, that is one of the reasons why we have such a difficult time. I think that the messaging that we need to do, and we've done a good job of this on some level, but we still have a long way to go, is taking it off of the baby and really taking it off of the focus of the baby. And that whole messaging doesn't work anymore. Since the pandemic, since Roe versus Wade, hearts of women have gotten so hard, and women in crisis, especially, where ultrasounds are not working the way that they used to. I mean, I know I've talked to, had stories at pregnancy centers where the women came in and wanted to take the picture of the baby home and memorialize the baby, but were absolutely adamant that they were going to have this abortion because this is what they needed to do. And so we have to really focus on her, and really focus on resources for her, really focus on not just handing her a list of resources, or even, something as simple as a baby shower. We've done that for a long time to support her. That's not for her. That's baby focused. Now it helps her because she doesn't have to buy it, but that's not for her. That parenting classes, that's not for her. That's for her child. So she can be a good mother, but it's not for her. And so really seeing her as more than just a mom, you know, as more than just a woman who's having a baby, but seeing her as a woman who is now going to be sacrificing career and dreams and all of these things. And how do we come around her in that moment and really be there for her? And I think, having one person believe in you can change your life. And really getting into those roles of being a mentor. And the pregnancy help movement has done that in many ways very well. And in other ways, we haven't done it quite as well, because it's hard, because women in crisis are difficult. People are difficult. It's not just women in crisis. People are difficult. But, that kind of a focus, shifting that a little bit, because Planned Parenthood is doing it really well. They are concerned about her, and all the messaging is her.
Do you think so? I hear that, and I've certainly been a part of organizations and messaging and all of that that's geared towards her. Do you think that most women want to keep their babies and they have no idea how they're going to do it? I guess I'm just wondering how you get to a point like where you can completely remove the baby from the equation, since the baby is part of the equation. So help me understand kind of what that looks like when you
Yeah.
say focus on her.
Yeah, I think that and I don't know statistics. The Vitae Foundation could probably give you some great stats on it. But I know that looking at comments, because I do a lot of, watch TikTok videos and different things, especially around the conversation of chemical abortion. And you will have someone who will talk about their chemical abortion experience. And all of them, not all of them, an overwhelming majority of them will say, I want to be a mom someday. But right now, it's not just the time. I want to have children someday, but we just weren't ready right now. And so those kinds of conversations with her, okay, what does that look like? What do you mean by that? What barriers would need to be eliminated for you for now to be the time? Are those barriers even possible to be eliminated for now to be the time? Those kinds of things, helping her to plan that, yes, you may have to take a year off of school, or yes, these kinds of things, but problem solve to get to that answer. I can tell you that in the recovery room of the abortion facility, it did not matter whether that woman came in shouting her abortion or with children in tow, conflicted about the decision she was about to make. In the recovery room, every single woman was sad. Every one of them. Because there was a loss. Now, if there's a loss, then that shows that something was lost. And so that's where we can potentially help her see it'll look different, but you don't have to completely lose. And so I think that's one area and one way that we can do it. But again, that's not it's a whole lot easier to say, go have this abortion and all your problems will be solved, than to try to plan careers in school. It's, what I'm telling you is not an easy answer, but it is the answer that we need to move towards, unfortunately, or fortunately, but yeah.
Yeah. So what was it like working in an abortion clinic?
It was awful. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it. It was very much like being in a cult. Everybody, we would come, first off, no, the rule was you were never there alone. You didn't come in by yourself. You would wait in the car for somebody else to come in. And when it was time to leave, you would wait and two of you would leave at one time. And people say, oh, that's for safety reasons. No, that was not for safety reasons. It was because we were freaked out by what was going on in that building. Because we even recognized that there are princes and principalities that were at play, and you didn't want to be in that building by yourself, because it was freaky. So that was the first thing. The second thing was there was a lot of drugs and a lot of alcohol to deal with what you were doing day in and day out. The relationships were very coarse, very crude, lots of dirty jokes, lots of crude remarks, lots of commenting about the women that were coming in, making fun of their bodies or making fun of their hair or making fun of, oh, here's a frequent flyer, she's in again. It was very condescending and degrading. That was the staff. The doctor was very protected. So in the entire year that I worked there, I don't know that I ever saw his face, because he would come in once everything was set up. I saw the back of his head, and he would go from one room to the next, to the next, to the next, wash his hands, and leave the building. He was protected and was guarded. And so he was kind of a separate entity in the whole orchestration of the center. Abby said this in her talk. Abortion has a smell. Abortion has a sound. Those kinds of things you will never, like, you turn on the abortion machine now, as soon as my stomach drops, and it takes me instantly back there. Those kinds of things that I will never forget. When I was pregnant with my son, my oldest, and I had dreams every single night that he was going to be born without a head. And when we did the gender scan, I didn't care whether it was a boy or girl. I was worried, did my baby have a head? And I realized that was from the trauma of working in that industry and seeing that so often, that was my scare. So there are things like that you just can't explain. Women crying, coercing women. I mean, it's dark and it's awful. And it's terrible. And then, at the time where I worked, we didn't have any advocates. We had protesters. And so there's this righteous indignation that we felt against those evil people. And it like drives you to do what you do every day, and protect. And there's it's this weird thing where you like think these women are awful, but you also want to protect them. You want to protect them, but not from you, kind of a thing. It's that whole blinder thing. So it is a very strange, it's a very strange thing.
Kelly, I've had a chance to visit with you before, and Marcia, you're going to want to brace yourself for this one. Kelly, tell us about the nursery.
Yeah, so the refrigerator where we kept the babies, the aborted baby fetuses, was called the nursery. And that is not just at my facility. That is an industry standard. That is what you call that. The POC lab, if you've seen the movie Unplanned, which is products of conception. Well, it was jokingly called Pieces of Children. Those kinds of things that, you can't, it's demonic. I mean, it really is evil and demonic and just lies and false that you wonder why it's so hard to break through to the workers in the industry. And that's why, because it's such mass deception.
Was it hard for you to leave? How did you end up leaving?
It was just one day I was like, I'm done, and I probably partied too hard the night before and overslept and just didn't show up. So no, it wasn't hard for me to leave. It was a gradual thing of realizing we weren't helping women, but we were coercing women, manipulating women. It did wear on me. The number of women that were hemorrhaging in the recovery room from perforated bowels and uteruses caused me to go look at my file and see if that had happened to me, because it happened so regularly. And when it did, we didn't tell them that it had happened. So those kinds of things over time, I was like, I'm not having fun doing this anymore. And it's interesting because while I was very, very pro-choice when I worked in the abortion industry, I didn't tell anybody what I did. I told them I worked at a women's clinic, but I did not tell them that it was an abortion facility. And that is something else that a lot of women that are come out of the abortion industry that are with our ministry, and then there were none. That is not an uncommon thing. A lot of women and workers didn't tell people what they were doing. Some did, but a lot of them did.
I've heard you say before, and I'm going to paraphrase, but you have said that finding acceptance within the pro-life movement has been relatively easy. I mean, having an abortion and all these things, except for the former abortion clinic working part.
Yes.
That was not well said, but that was paraphrased poorly. But is that still the case, and how do we change that?
Yeah, I think that our ministry, and then there were none, has done great things to change that perception. Abby Johnson, obviously, has done great things to change that. When I started working for the ministry, it's going on 4 years now, and I would go to conferences and present our organization and what we do. I, on a regular basis, would have people come up to the table and say, why would you want to save those people? It was very common. It still happens now occasionally, but it's a lot less common. I still, I did a Fox op-ed, and there's been different things. And there are still people that comment, you're a murderer, you're going to hell, all of these that are people in the pro-life movement. So there are still, and they're right. Honestly, they're right. I am a murderer, but the Lord has forgiven me of that and shouldn't be called that. You know what I mean? So there's still some sects of the movement that are very unaccepting of former abortion workers. But most people, I think, have had their eyes open because we've become more public, because our stories are out there more, because they've gotten to know us more, because they see the power of someone like myself, like Abby, like the other 700. I think now we have 702 people who've left the abortion industry. Our stories are very powerful. And so it has changed some, but there are still those people that have a hard time. And, I'll be honest with you, I get it. Like, you want to vilify someone. We don't want the women to be the bad people, So who is going to be the bad people in this? And it would make sense that it would be the workers, that it would be the doctors. But unfortunately, or fortunately, they are also children of God. Jesus also died for them. They are also daughters and sisters and mothers. And their life is also valuable. And so we need to see past their evil deeds and see to who they are. And most people do a pretty good job. I think mostly thanks to Abby and the great work that she's done in changing some of those perceptions. But it's still out there. It definitely still, people kind of cringe when I tell them that I worked in the abortion industry.
Speaking of villains and wanting to vilify someone, that's something that I've heard that is especially hard for women who have had chemical abortions, that it kind of removes that villain, as you say, from the equation, and they become
Yeah.
the villain. Because for women who have surgical abortions, when they experience the regret and the guilt later, they can kind of shift the blame a little bit to the abortionist. They don't have that in a chemical abortion. And I know you mentioned that you had a chemical abortion and that you thought it was going to be quick and easy and painless, and you would move on with your life. Mifepristone is in the news a lot right now because of the recent Supreme Court decision. Can you speak to the chemical abortion side? What is it that we need to know about that, and why do they get away with saying that it's quick and painless when really it's not?
Yeah. Oh, we could do a whole podcast on that. Yeah. So I was actually part of that case. I
Okay.
worked with Alliance Defending Freedom, when they were going against the FDA. Um, I think the things that we need to know is the abortion facility is now no longer the seedy place across town. It is now every bathroom in every place. It is the high school. It is your bathroom. It is your church's bathroom. It is the college dorm. It has taken our abortion facility from that building to our homes, and our mailboxes is now the abortion provider, basically, And so recognizing that, realizing that it is everywhere, and that it is, I've been in states like Texas, and within 15 minutes have ordered the abortion pill regimen to come to me in Texas, even though it's illegal, because there's so many organizations out there running drugs, basically a underground drug cartel. Your 12-year-old, your 10-year-old, your 15-year-old has full-blown access to it for very little bit of money. And so understanding that is the new reality. That is the new reality of abortion. Why it's sold as quick, easy, and painless is because women are afraid to speak up. Nobody wants to be known for the worst day of their life or the worst decision of their life. Nobody wants publicized at their work or at their school or at their church or wherever that they've chosen this. Many women are doing this without anybody knowing. And so there's this added level of shame. They say it's privacy, but it's actually secrecy. And the secrecy of it causes women to be silent. The FDA case that we just lost, one of the things with that was in the drug warning label for the mifepristone, it says that 1 in 25 women who take this medication for the abortion will end up in the emergency room. 1 in 25. But yet it said that it is as safe as Tylenol. Every single person we know has taken Tylenol. Every person we know, male, female, everyone. I don't know anyone who has ended up in the emergency room from taking Tylenol. But 1 in 25 will end up in the emergency room from this. So saying it's as safe as Tylenol is like, you're talking out both sides of your mouth, right?
Yeah.
Safe and easy and painless. Well, that's, again, it's just lip service. We had women call us at the abortion facility that I worked at and say, I'm having this experience or that experience. And we would say, oh, you're fine. Basically, put on your big girl pants and let's move on. Like, you're fine. Everything's going to be fine. Just denying the reality of it. And again, talking about, go to the comments on TikTok videos, go to the comments on these different platforms of these women telling their stories, and you will have countless women underneath them say, this was the worst experience of my life. I'm glad that I had the option to do it because I got to continue in my career. I get to continue in this. But this experience was nothing like what they told me. It was horrible. I thought I was going to die. Countless. And so it doesn't take a lot of research to find that. But the talking points, the reality, Marcy, is we're going to see women die. We already are, and we are going to see more women die from this procedure and die alone in their bathrooms, bleeding out because nobody knew what they were doing. Nobody knew what was going on. And that may be, unfortunately, that may be when we start seeing changes, is when we start seeing the women die from this.
You mentioned a couple times in there, and I'm glad you did. When you were talking about, how the bathrooms, and you kind of threw in there the church bathroom. And you mentioned later on in the church. I'm so glad you did that. There is this massive denial of pastors, churchgoers that think, oh, well, not here. It's not a problem here. It's part of your story, isn't it?
It is. Absolutely. I was regularly attending church when I had my first abortion. They Gut Matcher Institute recently put out their report for Planned Parenthood, and I believe it was like 58%. It was nearly 60, between 50 and 60% of women who had abortions last year claimed to be regular church attenders. Not just check a box, I'm Christian, okay? Because a lot of people could say that, but regularly are attending our churches. If we could end abortion in the church, we would end abortion.
Wow.
But the problem is we're not talking about it. And I talk to pastors all the time. Oh, there's nobody in my church that's ever, I'm not even talking about abortion. I'm talking about abortion healing. Oh, there's nobody in my church that's ever had an abortion. And I'm thinking, sir, these women, so you're assuming every woman in your church has been saved since she was 3 years old. And then on the other side, on the flip side, I talk to pastors and I talk about abortion healing, and they say, Kelly, we can't do that because my wife has experienced an abortion, or my daughter had an abortion and nobody knows about it. And so we can't talk about that because then we have to uncover our own sins. And my conversation with them is, well, you have divorce recovery groups, you have addiction recovery groups, you have all these other things, and in your family you have this, and this. Why is this one topic? And it's because of the shame. It's because of the shame that is around it.
What should pastors say? How should they talk about abortion from the pulpit, or what programs do churches need to have? How should the church be talking about this?
Well, they need to be talking about it, period. That's a start. The overwhelming majority of churches are not even discussing the word abortion. So that's the first thing. We need to talk about it. Second thing, I think abortion healing recovery groups or access to those things are a super easy, low-hanging fruit. The reality is most women, 50% of women that have one abortion will have a second abortion. So if we can get her healed from that first one, we will potentially save a second, a third, a fourth, and on and on and on. So that's one way. The other thing is supporting moms, supporting single moms, supporting working moms, having programs for that. But I think the biggest thing is just talking about it. And people get so freaked out, it's going to be a political issue. I'm not telling you to say what candidate to vote for. I'm not talking about any of that. You don't have to make abortion gross. Abortion is gross. You just need to talk about it and let women know. Mother's Day is a great time to talk about it. There's all kinds of times when you can talk about it, talking about the unpardonable sins that it feels like for women and men. This is not just a women's issue. That's the other thing. I read something the other day that said 1 in 3 men have an abortion in their history. 1 in 3, which is more than what they say women are. 1 in 4 women, they say. Men are not included in this conversation and recognize that they need healing and that, it was devastating for them. And there's actually, in many ways, it's more devastating for the men because men are natural born protectors. And they not only sacrifice their child, but they sacrifice the woman who they are created to protect on the altar of convenience. And so there's this double burden of what they paid for it likely, and they drove her likely, and they did all the things, but then she was the one who had to actually go through the pain and go through the suffering and go through the healing of it. And so for men, a lot of times it's even harder in many ways than it is the women. And talking about that. So I think, Marcy, first thing, we just got to talk about it. and then have the healing resources out there. And you start with that, other things will just naturally progress.
You mentioned 4 kids, is that right?
That I
Oldest is a boy.
I have 6 kids actually.
Six kids. Sorry.
No, I have 2
And
boys and 4 girls. Yeah.
That was a really poor setup. Okay, poor setup for the question I actually want to ask.
Okay.
So, what do you say to that girls of a certain age, right? Of let's say late teens, early 20s,
Sure.
who are out there? Maybe your sons. What? Maybe somebody's listening now who finds themselves in some situations. What's your message directly to them?
Oh, well, that's a loaded one. My first message is, if you are having sex, there's a good chance you're going to get pregnant. Period. And if you don't want to have an abortion, a good solution is don't have sex. Period. Now, that being said, I know that for a lot of people, that especially in this generation that's coming up, that whole concept is totally foreign. Um, I think that as a parent, it is vitally important that we have communication and relationship with our kids on the smaller issues, so that when we get to the bigger issues, it's easier to have those conversations. If the first time I'm trying to have a heart to heart with my 16-year-old son is about the topic of abortion, I've failed. I mean, quite honestly, it's too late. We should have had heart to hearts about lots of things up to that point. Now, that being said, it's never too late, because you can always try to, make up for it. Um, but my kids are very aware of the realities of abortion. And that's, that a lot of parents are afraid. They don't want their kids to know. Your kids are hearing about it anyway. They're already hearing about abortion. They're already hearing about sex. They're already hearing about these things. And as a parent, you are the plumb line for every piece of information that your child's going to get. And so the first time they hear something from you, it's then going to prove or disprove, is that true or is that false? So I try to talk to my kids about topics very early before anybody else is, because I want to be the plumb line that they are then trying to prove or disprove. So I think that as a parent to a child, I think that's, the thing. We want to have open discussion. We want them to know that there is no shame, that there is no sin that's unpardonable. They're not going to be kicked out of school or kicked out of our house or any of that crazy stuff. Mom's not going to have to step out of the ministry because you had to sit, like, none of that stuff. Like, erase that feeling from them. Then for those people that are in their 20s that are struggling with this, there is so much help out there for you. There is so much help out there that you have no idea about. It is not like it was 20 years ago when I was pregnant, where there wasn't a lot of help and a lot of resources. There's so much help out there. And so take a moment and pause. Don't do anything rushed. Don't do anything in fear. A decision based out of fear is never going to be a good decision. So take time, talk to people, get resources, see what's out there for you. Make an educated decision about what you're going to do. Now, obviously, I 100% am for life 100% of the time, regardless of the situation. But you need to research what's out there for you, and know that if you choose abortion, you will regret it. No one ever regretted having a child, but I've talked to thousands of people who regretted having an abortion. And so before you make that decision, know that you will regret it, and get as much information as you possibly can about the decision that you're going to make.
Sounds like we could probably have a part 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5. Lots and lots of different things we could cover. Abortionworker.com, though, we want to draw attention to that for people who are in the industry. There's help to get out.
Correct.
Right? And so we would steer people to that. And then There Were None is the name of the organization, abortionworker.com. You get some resources there. You said how many people so far? Have
702.
Some on?
We just got our newest
Wow.
number, 702 former
that's
workers.
awesome.
Yeah. And even
That's
if you
awesome.
were not
Fantastic.
currently in the industry, but if you were in the industry even 45 years ago, and you want to get around other women and men, mostly women, who have gone through this experience, There's something therapeutic and healing about sitting in a room with other women who've experienced that, where you can say things like it was called the nursery and it not be, and you recognize that your experience was not isolated. There's a lot of healing in that. And so that the other resource is a website called little-pills-that-kill.org. And that is focused on the chemical abortion. And so we take lies and information that the abortion industry is saying, like it's as safe as a Tylenol. And we have former workers like myself who share what we were actually told to say, what we actually saw happening, and the realities of it. And so you're hearing it from the perspective of those of us that used to dispense it. So it's a great resource for the chemical abortion specifically as well.
And I would also encourage people. I've had the pleasure of being in an audience where Kelly was addressing the audience. Was there for a pregnancy center. It was fantastic. It was even more riveting than today. And so I would encourage people to reach out. And Kelly's a great speaker. So I appreciate you joining us here today. It's been great.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. And we'll do it again. Now, let's do a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5. I love it.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks again for listening to Dear Jane.
You can follow along every day on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And make sure you also are subscribed so you never miss an episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube. Ring that bell so you're notified and you never miss an episode.